we tend to push ourselves too hard on the easy things.
Mm,
And that limits us from being able to push ourselves hard in the hard stuff.
mm. Interesting,
And this idea that like you push a little too hard on the easy stuff, which means you can't really push hard on the hard stuff,
yeah.
is actually one of the most basic mistakes that people make when they train. Is the easy stuff feels good, so we work a little harder, but then
Right.
we worked a little harder on the easy stuff, which means it drained our battery and our gas tank. And now
Yeah.
we're going to go try to do the hard stuff, but we're like, oh, I'm too tired to do the hard thing hard.
Yeah.
So it actually takes as much discipline to train easy as it does discipline to train really hard.
You really are the perfect person to talk to right now, especially considering where my podcast is at the moment. Basically, I'm not going to go into obviously what you do. I've looked up what you do and I'm really fascinated by it and impressed actually. So, before we go into the topic of the podcast, I'd really like it if you could introduce yourself and kind of talk a little bit about your experience and your specialties. Yeah.
Yeah, happy to. So yeah, first of all, thanks so much for having an opportunity to be here on your podcast. It's great. I mean, I think the topic and the focus is super relevant, so I'm excited to dive into the questions. My background is, as a strength and conditioning coach, mostly with elite athletes. I started off at our Olympic Training Center here in Calgary, Canada, which is where I currently live, and along the way, I've always sort of been, working between science and practice, if you could call it that. I'm right at that intersection, and so, a big focal point was around about 2010. I was working as a strength and conditioning coach with our women's alpine ski team, and so I was sort of the head of performance for the women's program, and it was really interesting. Half the team, more of the senior athletes on the team, had suffered these catastrophic knee injuries, which, by the way, disproportionately affect female athletes, these ACL injuries. I'm sure your listeners will probably resonate with that. But long story short is that took me on a journey to doing a PhD in medical science and really trying to understand, why female athletes injure their knees at such a higher rate compared to male athletes. And takes me to today where I'm a strength and conditioning coach still. I always say that's kind of my original roots, but really more day to day, I'm a researcher. I'm a faculty member in kinesiology here at the University of Calgary. I've got a research lab with graduate students, and we're doing all sorts of research on girls and women in sport, especially around knee injuries, around perimenopausal women, and the role of strength training for improving health outcomes. And I got a lab, I got students, that I teach, and I do a lot of consulting still with professional teams. Lots of athletes in the WNBA, actually, the women's NBA. So, yeah, I'm very much connected on a journey in my career around strength training, and that's where my passion is. Like I've always loved it, and I think there's so many health benefits to be taken from that. So it's my background, and
Love
yeah,
it.
yeah,
So good. And that's why I feel so grateful to have you on here because you are used to training athletes and, women that perform at such a high level.
yeah,
But really, what I want to talk about are women, like day-to-day women
yeah.
who love to go to the gym, who want to feel fit, who want to look their best, feel their
Mhm.
best. And specifically, I mean, the reason why I like this topic about training and working out in the gym is because, me myself, it's something that I do quite often. I try to go to the gym well, I'm going about 3 to 4 times a week at the moment.
Yeah.
And I feel like, um, probably like so many other women, I feel like when I go to the gym, I'm kind of just doing the same thing that I do every time. So I might do a leg day or I might do, some squats or some deadlifts and,
Mhm.
maybe some upper body work and things like that. And I just feel like I'm in a place in my program where I just feel kind of bored and a bit stuck. And I'm just like,
Mhm.
is this where it ends? Like, am I going to be just doing this, coming in, doing the same
Yeah,
exercises, maybe lifting a bit heavier over time because
yeah,
I'm kind of
yeah,
focusing on getting stronger. But
mm,
I guess I'm in a place where I'm like, where does this lead? Like, is this
sure.
every week now? And I
Yeah,
feel like so many other women probably do the same thing when they go into the gym. They come in,
yeah,
they do the same thing, and then they leave,
yeah,
and then they think, okay, and it just gets so boring over a
sure.
certain period of
Yeah.
time. So, I mean, for just say a woman who exercises regularly, wants to look great, feel great, and wants to take her training to another level, and she
Hmm.
wants to know that she's doing it the right way.
Yeah,
That's what I want to talk about today, like how she can progress her program, like how a woman
right.
can develop her program.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
I mean, for you then, from your point of view, what do you think is the most important thing when designing an exercise program for herself? Like, where does she start?
Ah, geez, it's such a great question, and I think one place to start is maybe with some anchors around, I think, why strength training is so crucially important for women across the lifespan. And I'm just going to throw out some random facts for you.
Yeah,
Um,
please.
did you know that in community dwelling elderly women, one of the most significant predictors, independent predictors of functionality across the lifespan, meaning you get to live in your house, walk to the grocery store, have your independence. One of the most significant predictors is leg power.
Wow.
And you might be thinking to yourself, hey, I'm talking to this person who's worked with, elite athletes, and how could this possibly pertain to me? But one of the most important things that we're seeing across the lifespan for women is actually training leg power, which
Wow.
may sort of seem a bit surprising right now, where maybe the lens has never been on that. But that's one really interesting fact that I think maybe women may want to know about why strength training is so important. Another fact is that right around that early postmenopausal period in women, it's one of the phases where bone loss is accelerated. And bone loss being sort of a vital thing around long-term health, avoiding fractures, these things across the lifespan, is a super super crucial thing to uplift your health.
Mm.
So, you think about where you want to be when you're in your 70s or 80s, and that seems like a long time down the road. But it's really interesting to note that when you're engaging in heavy strength training,
Mhm.
you are not only building your muscle tissue, you're also building your bones, and you're building your tendons, and you're building your ligaments. And this actually is a really, really, really important thing that's going to support your longevity. So it's like you're investing right now, and it sort of seems like a workout, but and it sort of seems like, well, what am I doing? But what you
Mm.
may not realize is that if we could actually go and take scans of your bones and your muscles, your ligaments and your tendons, we might actually see that these tissues are adapting really positively to all that load, and that's going to support you across your lifespan in a very profound way. And the third
What a
thing I'll
good
just say,
why for a program. I love that.
yeah, totally. Yeah,
Yeah.
100%. And then the third thing I just want to center in on is that, the other thing that, this is something I'm going to be very careful with how I state this, because, there are well described, but we'll just say gendered environmental barriers that may exist for girls and women to gain access to the benefits of strength training. And that could be everything related to how parents maybe promote physical development in kids.
Right.
It could be related to the gyms that you go to train in. It could be to how society sort of paints a picture of what our bodies should or shouldn't look like. And what's really interesting is that when I think, for what I've observed when I've worked with female athletes who sort of unlock this mental potential of being strong is beautiful, being strong is empowering, being strong is a whole other lens on what my body can do. what I've noticed, and this would be one of the things that I'd be working with, let's say with our athletes in ski racing, where they, as I mentioned before, they hurt their knees all the time. And one of the best ways that we can protect their knees against injury is to get them strong. Is it's a transformative process to realize that strength training is this conduit to being able to achieve a whole other level of physical potential. So again, back to like, I guess your opening question was, I'm in the gym, I'm trying to stay motivated, and I'm trying to figure out what I should do. And it just sort of seems like a workout. Maybe what we can do, and maybe what your listeners can do, is to define the why more fundamentally, and realizing like every time I'm in the gym doing my strength training, I'm doing something that down the road is going to make a profound difference on my functionality, my health. And I think once we understand that, we can start to pull the levers of how we do strength training to better promote those changes. So now you can
Mm.
make subtle changes in your training, in your programming, to maybe promote the things that are really going to support your health and your longevity and all those things. So I think those are a few things that maybe in the literature we see more and more now, and they're becoming more of a focus in the scientific community. And certainly those are messages that need to get out broadly, because it's one of the most empowering forms of training that we can engage in, especially for women.
Wow, you're selling it. This is, I'm
Yeah,
sold, like even more so than
yeah,
before.
yeah,
I
absolutely,
love this. This is so actionable. Like straight away, I feel like this is a great base for a
100%.
lady to work with. And just going back to your first point, the first thing that you said about why you should be doing your program, I can't believe that about leg power.
I know,
Not even upper body power, like specifically leg, like lower body power. Like that is
lower body power.
that's what kind of shows your longevity. That shows how healthy you are, basically.
Yeah, what it predicts is beyond all of the other things you can look at physically. So you can look
Gosh.
at your muscle mass, your body composition. Um, it's all those things don't really shake down to really being able to predict what keeps you functional. And I think
Yeah,
part of
it's
it is
true. It's the
staying
legs,
functional.
right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like being functional across your lifespan. And it's really interesting to note that, like, as we age, I mean, we all know this, right? Like, we're trying to, stay on the curve and to avoid it, really, as we age, really sort of dropping off and
Yeah.
declining in our physical performance capacity. But the idea that, leg power is going to be something across your lifespan that maybe not only predicts your ability to fight off a knee injury or your ability to keep playing with your kids and to
Hip
be out there doing the thing.
injuries.
Yeah, totally. And then that down the road, that it's gonna be a predictor of your ability to stay independent, across the lifespan, is just, I think, a very empowering thought. And I just when I look at the benefits for women, it's like, you know, the idea that there could be barriers for women to be like, well, maybe that's not for me. Like, maybe I shouldn't be lifting heavy weights. Maybe I should just keep it light and avoid, because heavy weights
Too
is
big.
more for yeah, or
Mm.
it's more for somebody else out there. At the end of the day, maybe one of the most important things I can say is that, heavy strength training is going to be really beneficial, and it's not about, it's not about creating a bodybuilder bulky body. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about the benefits of heavy strength training, and those benefits are just so profound. So being strong is awesome. It's
Yes,
awesome
it
for your health,
is. Yeah.
and it's a great thing to pursue.
Yeah. Oh, wow. This is so good. Okay. So, I have a whole list of questions, which I know you've seen. So I'm going to start with, so how long should a woman program in advance for her training? Like, should she have a program?
Well, I often say, when I'm teaching, teaching our undergraduate students about the principles of training, I'll often say that, hey, anything's better than nothing.
Hmm.
So,
Right. Got it.
you're at the end of the day, anything's better than nothing. But what sort of incremental improvements do you begin to see, or incremental gains do you start to see when you begin to sort of have a program and a process to how you train?
Mm.
And the reality is that we can make it a lot better. So
Mm.
going from just being like, hey, anything's better than nothing. So don't be paralyzed by the idea of being like, well, I don't have a program, so
Yeah. So why
what should I
bother?
do? Yeah, why
Mm.
bother? I think that's a big barrier for a lot of people. But moving a step beyond to having a program, I think is a really, really important. It's a really important piece of the puzzle.
Mm.
And so, I think when it comes to designing, sitting there at the front end and understanding, I'm going to build a program. Sometimes I describe it like building a nice meal, like
Mm.
you want to
I
have,
like that.
you don't want to have just, a big, plate of plain noodles.
Mhm.
You want to have green leafy vegetables, and you want to have maybe a lean protein source like a salmon or something like that, and have some nuts, and having some whole grains, or you're building a rounded meal which gives you all the different types of nutrients that your body needs. Think about building your training program the same way. It's like I'm going to build a menu of ingredients, and I'm going to convert them into a nice, tasty, appetizing meal. And and what's great is I don't have to just eat, the same thing all the time. I can change the meal a little bit. And that's actually a really fun thing about, all forms of training, is that we don't have to do the same thing all the time.
Mm.
And it's one of my favorite things about strength training, is that you can have all sorts of variation built into your program, which makes it a lot of fun, because you
Yeah.
can change the focal point of a program and you can be excited about it again. And
Mm.
that's a valuable thing psychologically. And so what I would say to your listeners is, think about building your training programs just like you would building a good meal, and
Mm.
think about how you want to have, the things that build your muscles and your strength, and the things that build your cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory health, and the things that build your flexibility and your core strength. All of these things will be important components, and I think they build a nice balanced approach.
So things like weight training, cardio training, core training,
Yeah.
flexibility, would you include any sort of, I mean, for your athletes for sure, like motor skill training, kind of like balance and power and things like
Oh
that. But do you
yeah,
think that sort of
yeah,
stuff is, useful for everybody?
for sure. And
Okay.
again, this is where I think, and especially for the benefits of something like strength training, where we sort of associate that with, potentially, well, only athletes would do the power training. It's not
Mm.
for me. I mean, I'm not why would I do power training? I'm not an athlete. And I guess if there's a message I could give here, is that it's exactly like you said it. Um, Power training, balance training, all of these components are extremely important for us. Maybe more important for the non-athletes, because athletes in their normal environment will get exposed to
Yeah.
power training just because they're playing sport, maybe.
Mm.
But for us, for the individual out there who's just aiming to, exercise and to stay healthy, um, yeah, it's a super important part of the puzzle. So
How often do we
that's
jump in a normal day, and how often do we
yeah,
get thrown off
rarely,
balance? Like not often.
rarely,
Yeah.
totally, yeah. And those will be the things that, I think over sometimes I say that training isn't. This is why I think, in general, training is very empowering, but strength training can be particularly empowering for women,
Mhm.
because sometimes I think it's like you're not doing all this training necessarily for your best day or just to feel good in the moment. Those are all great reasons. Like I'm not just minimizing that. I mean, a great workout is so good for your mind, but maybe you're doing all of this potentially for that worst day event. Maybe it's the day where, you know, it could be something where the consequences are low, but you're maybe running through an airport to try to catch a flight, and you've got to hustle, and you're running with your bags, and having that physical capacity gives you the ability to meet that demand. Or maybe it's something a little bit more a little bit more consequential, like, slipping on a patch of ice and having to catch a balance so you avoid a fall and a concussion. These are the sorts of things that when we train and you think about building your balance and your power and your strength, it's there's some really fundamental reasons why I think in life these things unlock our ability to have health. It's because we are able to have a new level of being able to meet the demands of life, sometimes unexpected demands. And it's a really important reason why we should think about our function in that way, beyond just the aesthetics, beyond just the cardio. It's having all of these physical abilities are super important.
So how does this look then? Because I'm trying to like picture this. You say the ingredients of the meal, so I get the ingredients now. So cardio, weight training, flexibility, some power maybe, and
Mhm.
I think I've just said flexibility. But anyway, so I'm just thinking, how does this look over a period of a week and over a period of, let's say, a month or maybe a few months? Like, how do you
Yeah.
put all of these things in? Do you need to work on all of them in one session? Do you need to work on one per week and then one on the second week? Like
Yeah.
how does it look in a woman's program? Because this is already feeling more exciting. Like I'm not just going into the gym to lift weights now. Like now I'm thinking, okay, so I've got to include all these other elements as well. How does can she realistically do that?
Well, this is a really, really, really good question. And I think that, again, I'll just maybe preface by saying if if it feels overwhelming and it feels like it's getting complicated, um, remember, let's simplify it down. So what is probably one of the best things that we'll do in training individuals, whether they be athletes or people who are just aiming to improve their health, is we pick goals. And you probably know that it's impossible to have 10 goals at once.
Mm.
10 goals at once can be like, oh my Lord, this is like overwhelming. But if we can pick, let's say, maybe a couple of goals every 6 to 12 weeks that we really center on, and those become our goals for that period of time, and we create a bit of a prioritization around it. And it doesn't, these can change over time, but picking a couple of goals and a couple of focal points, for example, it could be a period of time where the goal is to get strong, and you pick a couple of movements, and that becomes your focal point. So in your week, you might have your strength training sessions that are you know focused on strength. And then, changing your goals over time, because this is a lifelong pursuit, is kind of the fun of training. So what I would say to your listeners is, we'll probably get into a little bit more about like specifics, like let's say in a week or a session, like do I do cardio first or strength second? We can talk about that, and we can talk about that nuance, maybe about some best practice about like how to like actually structure these things. But I would just start at a high level, and I would say that, you know, um, every, just like you set goals for yourself every 12 weeks or every quarter in life around your business development, and you've got maybe growth targets that you're trying to hit, or family goals, or things that you're trying to help your kids get through with school. We have a real opportunity when it comes to how we train to break that year down into four quarters, and to pick goals inside those quarters that are important to us, that can change. And we can emphasize, periods of time where we're focused on getting stronger, periods of time where we're focused on building our cardiorespiratory fitness, period of time maybe where we want to increase our leg power, periods of time where we want to build, our flexibility or our core strength. And we can really enjoy training across our lifespan by having different goals at different times. There's nothing wrong with that. And I think that helps to keep it fresh. It's like, there's nothing wrong with being like, I'm in a phase right now where I've been doing a lot of, Pilates and body weight work, and, my spine feels amazing. And now I'm going to go into a phase where I'm going to try and deadlift
Mm.
20% more than I've ever done before. And that's, that's a totally reasonable thing for people who train and exercise and want to do different things across their lifespan to stay healthy, is to pick a goal and pick a couple and to define, to define new objectives. And it's totally a reasonable thing to do.
I love that. And so that means, so your goal determines the part of fitness that you focus on, whether it be strength,
100%.
cardio, core, and flexibility, power.
Yeah.
But just say a lady wants to look toned and she wants to lose a bit of body fat. I mean, that's what a lot of
Yeah.
women want.
100%. Yeah.
So just out of that meal then that you just put together. So
Yeah.
what would you focus on? What would you focus on if that was your client?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I would 100% have at least 2 to 3 days a week of good strength training. Remember that you're like to look toned. We often think about that being a body fat thing. Like if I get my body fat down, I'll look toned. But we
Yeah.
forget that looking toned is like when our muscles get bigger, right? And we
Mm,
call it in the scientific world, we call it, as a fancy word for this, we call it hypertrophy.
yeah.
But hypertrophy just means making a muscle bigger. When we hypertrophy a muscle, that often gives the view of tone, right?
Mm.
So, there's sometimes this idea that like tone is achieved by losing weight, but tone can
That's what I
actually be
thought.
achieved by
Yeah.
by building muscle, right? And
Mm.
so by building muscle, we create tone in our body because our muscles begin to become sculpted. And so obviously all the aforementioned reasons why strength training is so great for us across the lifespan, notwithstanding, I would say, right off the hop, maybe 2 to 3 days a week, we're doing strength training. And in that strength training, focused on multi-joint movements, focused on whole body, so that we're not neglecting any body part. That's really an important part of strength development.
Like pushing
Um,
stuff, pulling stuff,
Pushing
squatting,
stuff, pulling
deadlifting.
stuff,
Yeah.
lifting, rotating with load.
Rotating. Yes.
Those
I've
things
get that.
are all, yeah, when we think about it in that context, pushing, pulling, lifting, hinging, squatting, and there's so many variations that we can create there, but that is the fundamental of, let's say, building block number one is you've got good whole body strength training. The second thing that you cannot overlook is the benefit of that lower end. Something the word now that gets thrown around a lot is zone one and zone two aerobic work. But
Right.
that aerobic work, which is the easy stuff, it's like, it's being on the treadmill, walking uphill, or going for a hike, or, it's like the low end aerobic work where you could sustain that for a long period of time. It's just so beneficial for our health. But obviously, it's another aspect of building a good basic fitness regime. And then the final thing I'm going to throw in there that I think would be really beneficial for your listeners who want to achieve those goals is to be able to have, every 4 to 5 days, some sort of high intensity interval based session. And, we're in this world where the high intensity interval based session has sort of become the mainstay of people's training programs.
Yeah.
And you might see this in like in the world of training athletes. Sometimes we would call this the sort of mid zone. It's like that intensity that if you self select on a like a spin class where it's not the hardest thing you've ever done, but it's certainly not easy. You're kind of right in
Mm.
the middle. Um, I would advise sort of staying out of there and either keeping it easy
Mm.
or making it super hard. And so when I'm talking about high intensity interval training, I'm saying that every 4 or 5 days, the thing that you put into your program is something that is really high intensity with your interval work, which allows you to push your system to its highest capacity. So
What
your
would that
aerobic,
be? Yeah, go on. Yeah,
that
carry
could
on,
be
carry on.
something like, yeah, it could be something like maybe it could be on a, like on a Peloton bike or a cycloergometer that you have at home or your treadmill, where you are going to um, perform, maybe anywhere from like 20 seconds to a minute of work, maybe to an upper ceiling of like 2 to 3 minutes. But let's say keep it around 20 seconds to about a minute of work. And you're going to go as hard as you can for that 20 seconds to a minute with a rest period in between. And you're going to repeat that not a ton of times. It could be a total of like, 10 to 20 repeats of that sort of intensity. But that is a really powerful way to boost our cardiovascular function. And it's also a really important way to keep things like our leg power and our you know our some of these other qualities that sometimes we forget about, keep them sort of high, and sort of to help turn on that metabolic furnace that we want to have for losing body fat and sort of achieving that look that we want to have. So those are kind of your three ingredients in my mind. Obviously we're not talking about nutrition here, but you can't achieve the sort of aesthetics without a good nutrition plan. But if you have strength training and you have your low end aerobic work, and then you have your smart use of high intensity interval training, every 4 or 5 days where you drop in a short high intensity session, it's a really good way to build a good training program in general, but also to to achieve those body composition goals that we all have.
I'm loving this because this is kind of aligning with what I've been learning from a lot of the guys that you know. So Paul Larson, Phil Maffetone, that's kind of what they talk about. Phil Maffetone is all about the MAF method, which is obviously the zone 2-ish kind of training zone for your cardio. And then Paul Larson is about the HIIT training. And he also said, do the HIIT training. I mean, he does it. He said he does it like often, but he said, for someone who just wants to feel fit, feel good, doing it at least once a week, like he also said once a
Yeah,
week. So that it's
totally.
all kind
Yeah,
of like adding up. But the
yeah,
strength stuff is really interesting. So like what is the strength then? So 'cause would you define that as 1 to 6 reps? Do you like doing all those, like 1 rep and then 6 reps, or
yeah,
do you like to focus on one in particular? Does 1 rep max, does she need to figure out her 1 rep max to do strength training? Like, so let's talk about that, like reps, sets, one
yeah,
rep max, things like that.
yeah. Totally. So, um, uh, so let's just kind of go back to three things: building muscle, building strength, building power. So those are three fundamental objectives of strength training: building our muscles, making them bigger, building our strength, our ability to put force out, and then building our power, which is the ability to make like that fast force. And I hope at the start of this podcast today that I've made a good argument why all three are important across our lifespan, and they're not just for athletes.
Totally.
So
Yeah.
when we think about building our strength, that's the heavy strength training piece. So if you imagine being in the range of probably anywhere from 3 repetitions up to about 8 repetitions, it's an ideal zone to be able to increase our strength. And when we say increasing our strength, that means we are trying to lift heavier weights. Now, that doesn't mean that, you have to lift the same weights as I lift. It means that that's defined for you, right? So it's how much weight can you lift in that range of 3 to 8 repetitions. But it is really important to say that for you, you need to be in a zone where you are, let's say, aiming for 4 or 5 repetitions, and you're going to try to push for 7. So you're trying to push the envelope. One thing that I'll just sort of caveat here before I go into the next zone is that when we're doing this zone for strength, sometimes I call it zone 3 training for strength. So it's the development of strength. We have a lot of questions in the literature about whether you have to go to a point what we call momentary failure. And
Right.
you may know momentary failure because you're in the gym, you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I can lift this.
Right.
And
Yeah.
maybe I need, that's maybe where you need a spotter. And what's really interesting to just for your listeners' own information is more and more evidence shows us that you don't have to go to momentary failure.
Right.
But it's good to get kind of close to it. So what I like to say is when we're trying to build our strength, we're going to be in what we call zone 3. We're going to be lifting heavier loads around 3 to 8 repetitions. And what I'd like us to think about is maybe you're picking a weight that you do 5 times, and if you're feeling good, you try to push for 7.
Mhm.
So you're right in that zone where, but I could not do 8.
Mhm.
So that's a good way to think about how we build our strength. The second zone that I want to talk a little bit differently about is this idea of building our muscle size, right? So
Mhm.
we call this hypertrophy, and building hypertrophy, and I'm going to call this our zone two, which is going to be now where maybe we're starting at 8 repetitions, and we could go as high as 30.
Mhm.
So now this is the zone where your conventional could be like, your typical programmer, you may be doing 12 repetitions in a row, getting kind of close to momentary failure. That's kind of maybe a familiar zone for your listeners. But if you think about that zone now, we sort of start at a basement of 8 reps,
Mhm.
and we can maybe go all the way as high as 30, which is now meaning that the loads are going to be a little bit lighter, the rest intervals are going to be a little bit shorter. We're going to be working more on more volume in our program, right?
More
And this is going to be a
exercises
zone
and
that's really good. Yeah,
yeah,
it'll promote the sort of increases in our muscle size.
yeah,
And then the final zone I'll throw out around power, and we're going to call this zone one.
right.
Zone one would now be taking kind of lighter weights, but trying to lift them fast. So this would be a scenario where, maybe I've got a weight on the bar that's only maybe 30% or 50% of my max, but I'm actually trying to move the weight really, really quickly. So you've got these 3 zones. And what is sort of the fun thing about building your training program is that picking one zone as a focal point for maybe 6 to 12 weeks and then moving to another zone for 6 to 12 weeks is a really good way to do long-term strength training. So to boil it down for you, if we were working together, we might pick a 6 to 12 week period where you're going to be in zone two, and we're going to be picking full body movements. We're going to be doing somewhere between 8 and 30 repetitions. Our goal is going to be to increase the size of the muscles, and to do so, with full body movements, shorter rest, and then you get to your second quarter of the year, and you change to zone three, and now you're focused more on the strength building phase. Now we're going to work between that 3 to 8 rep range, heavier loads, and the goal is to get stronger. So that's a really simple way to think about strength training, is that, if you again, when I'm teaching our students about the idea of like power, strength, and hypertrophy, and how we use different loading for each of those, it starts to form a really nice model for how we can train over the long term, by emphasizing one of those zones over the other, over our training periods. So it's one way that you can approach it.
I mean, I can see this coming together, which is really exciting. But what if, so obviously when women hear, well, not all women, but a typical lady would hear, muscles getting bigger, and she would
Yeah.
probably think, oh, can we skip that phase? Like,
Yes.
I don't
Yeah. Yeah.
want that. Can she skip that phase? Like, and does she get bigger? Like, what's happening? Like, because the muscle does get bigger. Like, I have to kind of, I feel my muscles getting bigger, and but not in a huge way. Um,
Yeah.
and that's true, right? Because of the hormones, like we don't have the testosterone that men have, and
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what's really interesting is that, um, so just if you kind of like recap these 3 zones: zone three, zone two, zone one. Zone one's your power.
yeah,
Zone two is your muscle hypertrophy,
I'll have much
and
more
zone three is your strength.
strength. Yeah.
What's really interesting is when we are, if you want to skip the muscle building component, so this is the hypertrophy component. One of the ways that we'll often do this, and sometimes I'll take the example of athletes who are like in a weight class sport. So maybe you're in a sport where you don't want to increase your size because it's, you're competing in an event where that's a limit. What we will do is we will leave out the zone two. So they'll have only a focus on the strength building and the power building. So right off the hop, if your listeners are very, very, if the idea is to skip the muscle building, that's totally reasonable. And and this is something that's sometimes a bit counterintuitive, is that lifting the heavy weights in zone three, like where you're in that, let's say I'm going to do 3 reps and push to 5. we often think that that's the zone where you're going to be bulking up because it's heavy weights,
Mm.
but actually,
Right.
it's actually the total opposite. That's the phase where we are working on our expression of our ability to make strength. It actually really heavily involves our brains. So we're essentially, if you think about it like this, like a skill, like think about like playing the piano
Mm.
or playing the violin, where it's a skill that we have to sort of express. Being in zone three, where we're lifting sort of heavier weights and trying to emphasize our strength, is it's just like building a skill.
Yeah.
And your listeners might be pleased to know that that zone is actually uh, been shown to have a minimal effect on increasing muscle mass. So
Mm.
100%, if I was in a scenario where, you had a client who said, I'm not interested in building muscle, I would stick out of the zone two, but I would educate them on the fact that zone three training, when we're lifting heavier weights, for 3 or 5 repetitions, when you're like, oh, geez, that seems like that's going to really bulk me up, I would try to educate them to say, you know what, that's actually a zone where we're going to be building your bone strength, your tendon strength, your muscle strength. And it's actually a zone where we expect to see minimal increases in the size of your muscle. So you get a lot of the benefits of strength training by being in that zone three without having that muscle building look. So it's a good way to remember that with strength training, the levers we pull have really specific effects on whether our muscles get big or we get strong or we increase our power. But
Right.
all three are important across our lifespan.
Okay.
So yeah. So hopefully
Yeah.
that helps. I mean, it's sometimes a misnomer that lifting heavy weights is the stuff that's going to bulk you up. That's not true. There's sometimes a misnomer that um, all strength training will make me bulky. That's not true. A lot of times to really put on muscle, it requires a lot of work.
Yeah.
It's like a lot of nutrition. So you can be sort of rest assured that simply doing three strength training sessions a week is probably not going to be enough to make you big and bulky.
Yeah.
And the final piece that you mentioned that I'll just touch on quickly is about hormones. And what's really interesting is that certainly on average, obviously male individuals will have higher testosterone, and testosterone is a very important anabolic hormone that promotes the increases in muscle size, but lots of other things too. But what's really interesting is new research comes out and looks at the ability for women to proportionally increase their muscle mass. So, like the ability for the same relative change between men and women with resistance exercise seems to be a lot more similar. So, certainly like the absolute changes tend to be larger in men, but women are also able to increase muscle just like men are. So there's a lot of parallel there in
Mm.
terms of our responsiveness of our bodies to strength training.
Um, so I'll just give you a personal experience or just personal update on where I'm at with my program. So I do strength training, and I've been promoting it a lot online and talking about how great it is. But then, you know, so a lot of women, a lot of people like myself, we want to just build one area. So let's say you want to
Yeah,
build the glutes. So
sure. Yeah,
is it safe to do, let's say, strength training, but then to throw in some hypertrophy for like one muscle group, like your hips, your glutes?
100%,
Okay, because
100%.
that's my
Yeah.
program. Yeah.
100%. And you know what? And this is the beauty of strength training. You can have, because strength training can be so regionally targeted, you could 100% say that I'm going to be in a training phase where I'm going to try to think about increasing my, leg strength and my leg power so that I don't increase my muscle size
Mhm.
globally. But I'm going to have 2 exercises at the end of my strength day
Right.
where I focus on the developments of, glutes and hip extensors as a more hypertrophy focus.
Yeah.
And what you just described, which I love, is you just talked about building a meal.
Yeah.
You said I'm gonna have my main thing that I want to have on my plate, and then I'm gonna have a nice dessert at the end of like, something that is like a different focus or goal. Strength training is the same thing. You've got your You've got your main part, and then you add in this thing at the end that's focused on something that you want to achieve or do, which could be hypertrophying a region,
Yeah.
of our body, or it could be addressing like another one as well that sometimes is a different goal, but could be equally important. Is sometimes individuals may be focused on injury prevention. So maybe you have, listeners who are playing recreational soccer or competitive soccer still. I know that's a really common, the actual increase in women who are participating in competitive sport across the lifespan has increased dramatically. And maybe there's women who are listening to this who say, hey, I want to increase my leg strength and my leg power, but maybe as a secondary goal is I want to get my hamstrings really strong so I don't hurt my knee,
Mm.
because hamstring strength might be an important factor that helps keep our knees safe. There's another example where maybe, we add on a piece to our program that's really specific,
Yeah.
oriented with a goal that we have that's very personal.
Yeah.
And that's 100% a great way to approach building a good strength training program. So I love that you're doing that because it's an amazing uh, I would say it's an amazing part of strength training is that you can build a program like that and achieve goals that are highly personal.
Mm.
And it's an awesome way to build it.
And you know, the way I see hypertrophy training and then strength training, like hypertrophy training is the lactic acid, the burn, the fatigue,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
just
yeah,
the soreness, the pain. But
yeah,
that's what stimulates the growth, right? But then strength just
yeah.
doesn't hurt. It's just it's the brain, like you said. It's just
You
can
got
you
it.
lift it? Just doesn't hurt. Yeah.
100%. The big drivers of being able to create muscle hypertrophy responses, so making our muscles bigger, is the volume of training that we're able to do. So, having a high volume of training is a real big driver of making our muscles grow.
And that would mean
And
like many exercises, many sets.
many
Yeah.
exercises, many sets in that zone where, in that zone two training, you might be doing 8 to 12 sets per muscle group or body part. You're doing, repetitions between 8 and 15.
Yeah.
You're getting the
That's gonna
burn. You're
hurt.
feeling that.
Yeah.
Sometimes we call it the pump. It's like the short rest. All that type of training is hypertrophy oriented training. And you totally nailed it. When we talk about zone three, which is our strength building, think about the skill of making force
It's a
and think about,
skill. Yeah.
it's a quality program. It's
Mm.
short, it's focused, it's got high loads, but it's done in a very minimal way where you don't really feel the burn after. You
No.
feel more the effects of like pushing your brain and your
Yeah.
muscles to push out that high level of force that you're not used to doing. So
Yeah.
they're very different
They are
feelings, and
very
that's why
different.
strength, yeah, very different. But just for your listeners to again, I want to just reiterate this. That heavy strength training that we're talking about in zone three, which I'm sure your listeners have experienced this fear of being like, well, I don't want to bulk up, and they may be inclined to say, well, I should lift light weights. I should just keep it really light and work on tone. I want to just illuminate for your listeners that heavy strength training where you're in that zone three, what you described is that like my muscles don't feel that burn. I just feel like I'm lifting heavy weights. It is so beneficial for women across the lifespan. It is so beneficial for increasing bone health, muscle health, tendon health, for increasing our strength to sort of keep our functionality across the lifespan. And that's just a whole different way to think about strength training. And it's not the type of strength training that bulks you up. It's the type of strength training that really increases your ability to make muscle force. So it's an important thing to mention that that zone three work, as you describe it, is just so good for us, especially for women. So,
And the one
yeah.
rep max stuff, she doesn't, would you say she doesn't really need to touch on that? Like
Mm-mm.
to figure out how much she should be
Nope.
lifting in strength. Okay, so no need for
No,
testing
no,
how much you can lift
no,
in one
no
repetition.
need. No.
Okay.
You know what what I would say you do as a perfect starting point is you find a weight that you can do 5 or 6 times and it feels pretty hard. Like you're right at the point where you're like, oh my gosh, I don't think I could do 7.
Mm.
You're right at that point, but you're not at that point where you're like, oh my gosh, I can't lift 5. Like you
Yeah.
can get that 5 or 6 repetitions, and then you try to push for a couple of more.
Mm.
And so if you're feeling good that day and you're like, I did my 5, feeling good, I'm
Mm.
going to try to push for 7.
Yeah.
That's the mentality of strength building. And I think you don't need to test your 1RM. You just need to find a weight where it's kind of hard for you at 5. And so one of the things that I might do with you if we were, let's say, doing a program together, and let's say we were focused on a deadlift, is we might do 5 repetitions at a time. And we would start with a really, kind of a light weight that you're comfortable with. And we would do incremental sets where we add more weight each set. And we would work till we find that point where it's like, now we're at 100, maybe now we're at 40 kilos. And you're like, oh, this is getting heavy. And we push, 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 push. Like we get to close to 5. And I'm like, could you push for 6? And you're like, this feels like it's right about my limit. That's now the weight that you're going to use for the next 12 weeks as our starting point.
Mhm.
And as soon as you can do that weight and push to 7, the next workout, we're going to add a little more weight. And then we're going to do our 5, push to 7. Next workout, you can now do your 7, add a little bit more weight. Maybe you stick there for a few workouts where you're like, yeah, this is hard. And, but I always am, and the day that you can do 5, push to 7, we add a little bit more weight. And so you think about doing that workout to workout, and that's how we increase our strength.
Because you're
So,
staying in the zone 3. You don't want to go above.
yeah.
And yeah, that makes
Well,
sense.
and and if you go above, that's where your
Yeah.
listeners need to understand, like that's the zone where our muscles get big.
Right.
Um,
Yeah, that's
and
really
and
interesting.
and and so it's really important to know that being in that zone 3 is where we get our strength.
Mm.
It's also where our bones grow. It's where our tendons grow. It's where our muscles get strong. So it's really good for your body to do that. In fact, we're doing studies right now with women who are early postmenopausal women, and I'm involved secondarily on this study. The primary investigator is Dr. Lee Gable is her name, and she's a bone researcher. And what she's applying with early postmenopausal women. So these are women who are now 1 year after having lost their period, and they're in that early postmenopausal transition. It's a phase where, and I'm learning this more and more, it's a phase where women are at very big risk for increased bone loss. So your bones that's where you lose a lot of your bone loss or bone mass. And then over time, that's what sets us up for that long-term sort of like fractures and those sorts of things. And what Dr. Gable has been investigating with about a 9-month strength training program with women who are postmenopausal is looking at the effects of heavy strength training, doing exactly what I just described. So being in that zone where you're kind of about 5 reps, push to 7, deadlifts and squats. And I can tell you right now that the increases in muscle are pretty small. So nobody's bulking up. But you know what's getting bigger? Bones.
Wow.
You know what's increasing? Strength. So it's a really interesting project for your listeners to sort of think about that. These may be women who've never strength trained in their life, and they're doing that zone 3 heavy strength training and seeing great physical benefits from it. So it's just a crucial thing to sort of paint a picture that this is more than just sort of an option. It's something that could be really good, and you don't get those benefits by staying light.
Gotcha.
So yeah,
I love
so it's
that.
good to
This is
yeah.
so good. Where does cardio fit into this then? Because um, you mentioned zone 1, zone 2 training. So I guess the first question would be, what is that? Like, how would you define that? And then the question after that would be, okay, so how often should she do something like that? Just say she wants to, increase her cardiovascular fitness, she wants to lose a bit of body fat and, um, so how often, how long, and where does it fit in into her session? So there's a lot of questions there, but I feel like you can unpack
Yeah.
this.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so the first thing to say is that the zone one, zone two work is a lot easier than you think.
Mm.
And I'm just going to say that this is a scenario where if you're not wearing a heart rate monitor, or you're probably going to push too hard. Like
Correct. Yeah.
the zone that we normally settle in if we're going for a run
Mm-hmm.
or we're going to spin class is more what we call zone three.
Yeah.
And that's the zone where you could probably stay there for 40 to 45 minutes.
Mm. But you're
So when
breathless
we,
and you
but
can't
you're
hold a
kind of,
conversation very well.
you're right at that point where you can just barely hold a conversation,
Mm.
and you can probably last there for a good 40, 45-minute run. And when you come home, or 45-minute spin class or whatever,
Mm.
and when you come back, you're like, man, that was a hard workout.
Yeah.
You felt it. Zone five is that high intensity interval work where you're
Right.
like going full tilt. So just like strength training, where we have zone one power, zone two hypertrophy, zone three strength, we're defining now zone one and zone two being very kind of easy aerobic work. Zone three is normally where you settle if you're going to go for a run and push yourself for about 45 minutes. And when you get into zone four, zone five, that's now where we're talking like, wow, that's the hardest. Like that's something that I could only sustain for a couple of minutes. It's
Right.
really at the highest level of your intensity and output. So if we think about zone one, zone two, it's often a lot easier than what you would self-select as your pace. So your zone one, zone two needs to be in that sort of 60 to 70% of your max heart rate as your target. And when you're in that zone, you might look at your heart rate on your Apple Watch and be like, wow, I'm only 110 to 120 beats per minute,
Mm.
or 115 beats per minute. And it feels really easy. But
Mm.
it's a zone where there's many, many health benefits that come out of that zone, those zones of training. And what I find what's nice about that zone two work is that it can be really inserted into your day in a lot of various ways. I'll insert a lot of zone one, zone two work taking Zoom calls. I'll take my Zoom calls on the treadmill, small incline, and just sort of walking and talking. And I'm very comfortable at that pace, so I can carry on a conversation without any issue because it's an easier intensity. Sometimes another place that zone one, zone two can come in is at after strength training sessions. Now, the controversy on this is, some people might think that the zone two work could limit your ability to improve your strength.
Right.
The evidence really doesn't suggest that.
Mm.
On average, you're not you don't see that interference where your strength or your muscle mass is impaired by that zone two work. Maybe a little bit on your power,
Mm.
but at the end of the day, if you're crunched for time and you're tying in your zone two work at the end of the day of a day that you've done strength work or at the end of your strength workout, that's another spot that it fits nicely for especially for people who are time crunched. So what I would say is that trying to accumulate over your week, somewhere between, let's say, 2 to 3 hours of zone two work is a nice target for most people. And that doesn't have to come in all in one shot. It can be dispersed over the week in, sessions of 30 minutes to, 60 minutes, where we're putting this in as a sort of a backdrop in our training.
Just a
It's
little, and
Yeah,
sorry to interrupt you, but
no, no,
just a
go ahead, yeah.
little before I forget. So obviously I interviewed Phil Maffetone, which I've said many times, but when I do the math method, it's crazy because when I'm trying to stay in the zone two and not go any higher, it's mad how, eventually I'm doing a very slow jog, like very, very
Yeah.
slow.
Yeah.
Like so to him, that's probably means that my aerobic base needs to be built up a bit better. But it's a very, very slow jog, like almost embarrassing. Like if I'm jogging
Yeah.
on the road, I'm just like, oh
Yeah.
God, this is so
Yeah.
embarrassing. And like
Yeah.
at like towards the end, I even have to go into a fast walk because my heart rate is going way beyond what zone two is.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it's just really interesting how like you said, the pace, it's usually not the pace you would go for in a normal cardio session, what you would call a
It,
normal cardio session. Like
it
it's
is not.
it's much
It is
slower.
not.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like
You actually need, you know how, one of the things that I think is really interesting about training in general, and I'll try to frame this up so that it's accessible, but we tend to push ourselves too hard on the easy things.
mm,
And that limits us from being able to push ourselves hard in the hard stuff.
mm, interesting.
And this idea that like you push a little too hard on the easy stuff, which means you can't really push hard on the hard stuff,
Yeah.
is actually one of the most basic mistakes that people make when they train. Is the easy stuff feels good, so we work a little harder, but then
Right.
we worked a little harder on the easy stuff, which means it drained our battery and our gas tank. And now
Yeah.
we're going to go try to do the hard stuff, but we're like, oh, I'm too tired to do the hard thing hard.
Yeah.
So it actually takes as much discipline to train easy as it does discipline to train really hard.
Mm,
And that's a bit counterintuitive that you need, as you described, that discipline to be like, no, it's got to be easy.
mm.
That's the point of it.
So
Very important thing for improving your training effectiveness.
So does this mean that if she wants to stay in zone one, zone two, if just say she has a quite an active job, just say she's a hairdresser and she stands up all day and just say someone loves to garden and they're fairly just active throughout the day. Does that mean they're covering that part of the cardio, or do you think she needs to do it separately just to make sure she's
Uh,
measuring it?
yeah, I mean, I think um, let's start obviously with the basics of what we know is that those activities of daily living that keep us moving,
Mm.
and so like
Oh, so that's
we call them
separate.
micro
Yeah.
movements. Yeah,
Mm.
we call them, a lot of these like micro movements we do throughout the day. Certainly things like gardening, they're extremely good for us,
Mm.
extremely good for us. But zone one, zone two work might be one notch above that.
Right. Got it. So it's
Yeah, it's
above
one
like
notch.
daily
It's
living.
one
Yeah.
notch. Yeah, I mean, for
Okay.
me, like I've sort of mentioned a couple of modalities, but to give your frame of reference for your listeners is one of my favorite zone two workouts will be to set a treadmill at about 10 degrees,
Yeah.
6 to 10 degrees. And I'm walking at about maybe 3 miles per hour, depending upon where you are. That might be, that might resonate versus the conversion into metric. So I'll just keep it there and then
Yeah.
do the math on it. But so it's treadmills at 3 miles an hour. And I'm able to walk pretty comfortably. It's brisk. It's not like I'm walking to the local store. It's a brisk walk, but my heart rate settles up. It climbs up from about 100 beats a minute to 110, and then I settle right in about 117 to 120.
Mm.
And it doesn't go any higher than that. And I'm able to like by the time I'm about 30 to 40 minutes in, I got a good sweat. I've been able to carry on a conversation. I've never felt overexerted. That's the aerobic zone one, zone two that is so beneficial. Another great way to achieve this is on a bike as well. Like biking is awesome and is obviously really easy on our joints too, which is great. You mentioned jogging was another one, and jogging is a little bit tough in the sense that you're going to need to look at your watch because your inclination is going to be to naturally go a
Yes.
little harder.
Yeah.
And it's like I was just talking to somebody the other day, a woman who's one of our clients, and out for a run, and I gave them a call, and I can tell it's like, how's it going? How's the zone one, zone two? Oh, it's hard staying in zone one, zone two today. I'm feeling really good. I
And you can
was like,
hear it.
we gotta slow. I was like, hey, we gotta slow that down, right? Because don't forget, tomorrow
Yeah.
that's where we're going to do our zone 5, and you're going to need to be ready to push tomorrow. So if you push too hard today, it's going to limit your ability to push tomorrow. I need you to slow it down. And it's like,
Mm.
okay, discipline to slow it down. But
Yeah.
that sort of like pace that you hit when you run, where you naturally feel good and you want to stay there for about 40, 45 minutes, is a little too hard. So, maybe gardening's a little too low. Certainly that self pace is a little too hard. And we want to be in that place where, you can look at your watch and be like, yeah, that feels, I got a bit of a sweat. I can carry on that convo, no problem.
Yeah.
And your heart rate's sitting around that, 115 to 120 range. You're in your sweet spot.
So I've got to ask then, the zone 3, that zone where you're like, you do a spin
Yeah.
class or a hit class where you're kind of
Yeah.
sweating it out for 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
I mean, so are you saying that we should avoid doing those if for an
I,
optimal program?
I would say that if you looked at the percentage of training that you spend there, I would say that, if you're doing maybe 10 to 20% of your training in that area, um, uh, might be optimal. Um, and you might, sort of have that as a frame of reference for what would be like the ideal. If you are a person who just loves to do spin classes and that's your thing, and you're like, listen, am I doing harm by being here? No, definitely
Okay.
not. Like,
So
it's
if
not. We're
you
not.
can't do too many zone 3 cardios because I mean I guess a lot of people say, oh, if you do too many hit classes in a week, it could burn you out and hormones can, go unbalanced. And I mean, what would you say about that?
Well, this is where I think um, the the amount becomes really, really critical. A lot of people will start to sort of self-select around these. I'm just going to call them punishing, more mentally punishing zones, of like that zone 3, where it starts to become repeat every single day. And instead of being 10 to 20%, it becomes like 100% of what we do.
Mm.
And that is certainly at that volume and at that amount, that is where people do start to sort of show those signs of like that physical, sometimes we call it, one of the fancy terms we use in exercise science is, we call it non-functional overreaching.
Mm.
So when you train, the whole point around exercising is to put a stress on your body so your cells see the stress. And when your cells see a stress, that's what triggers it to build up and bolster its homeostatic mechanisms. And that's what bolsters your ability to get stronger and fitter and all these things. But when our cells start to see stress that is sort of not really productive, meaning that like after the training session, the cells are not able to keep up with, its repair and its regeneration, we get into a zone that we call non-functional overreaching. And non-functional overreaching is that you're training, but you're not really getting the benefits. You're not really getting the benefits from it because your body's not really recovering well from it. And that's where our system starts to, what you're describing, where we're beginning to get in that stage where you might be waking up and feeling more irritable, your sleep's disturbed, maybe your mood isn't quite where it normally is, you're kind of excessively sore with dead legs all the time. Your legs feel heavy, and you start to sort of potentially get to that phase where you're showing some signs that your body's homeostatic mechanisms are not happy. Like that's what it means when your sleep is off and your mood's off and you're feeling like junky and low energy. And sometimes that can be absolutely driven by this non-functional overreaching, which means you're exercising and you're training and you're doing stuff, but it's really the wrong amount. So, I would not tell your listeners by any stretch to, cut all the zone 3 out of their training. But if you had a target of maybe making it about 10 to 20% of everything you do, you're probably going to feel a lot better.
And so, I mean, the zone 1, zone 2, I presume that can be daily. That could be,
100%
daily. But then the zone
daily. Yeah.
5, is like you would say, oh, throw one in every 4 to 5 days, to allow
Yeah.
yourself to recover, to give yourselves time to recover
Yeah.
afterwards, because they're going to need it.
Yeah.
Do you know what? I'm already looking at my week and I'm just like, oh, this is looking so much more interesting. Like, this is
Yeah.
great.
Well,
This program design
totally.
is
Yeah.
lovely. Like, it gives you
Yeah.
structure and
Totally. Yeah.
yeah.
100%. And when you build it out, if you know where your planning comes in is try to optimize your training for that, when every 4 to 5 days, or let's say 4 to 7 days. I know Paul maybe said once a week, but
Hmm.
let's say you're optimizing for every somewhere between 4 to 7 days, you're going to have an interval session where you're going to really, 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 really push. Try to optimize so that when you get ready to do that workout, you've got a full tank and you can
Hmm.
really get after it. And you know what's so interesting? And I'll give you a little tip.
Yeah, go on.
When you do that workout and you think about what your max heart rate might be, like let's say you expect to be hitting like 180 beats per minute or 170 beats per minute, so you're really going hard. And when you do that session and you're going as hard as you can, and you're like, man, my effort level here is like a 10 on 10. And you look down at your watch and you're only hitting 140 or 150 beats per minute,
Mhm.
it's a really good sign that you didn't time your workout very well.
Mhm.
So
So your body can't
if
keep
you're
up
if you're
almost like the
yeah,
heart.
it feels hard, but your body's not responding physiologically. It's a
Mhm.
good sign that you didn't quite hit the timing. You're dipping in a little bit to that non-functional overreaching. So, that's a good way for, maybe for a little tip or trick to gauge whether or not you got the timing right. And if you're training and you're kind of like, just sort of prioritizing, those harder workouts, but you're protecting the rest by keeping it easy, right? There's so many benefits by keeping it easy,
Yes.
but then when you push, you go for it. The mismatch will be, man, I feel like I'm giving it everything I got, but man, I cannot get my heart rate up today. Good sign to be like, maybe I'm in a little bit of a non-functionally overreach state. Maybe I got a lot of life stress going on, and I'm just like, I'm not sleeping well for other reasons. Maybe it's because my zone one, zone two work, I was a little bit, pushing it, and maybe I was creeping up to the zone three because that's where I like to settle, and I feel so good when I do those 45-minute runs. Um, Maybe it's because I did a really hard strength training session that morning, and it's kind of interfering a little bit.
Mhm.
But it's just a great barometer for your listeners to know whether or not their training program is good. Is when you hit that session, if you've got a mismatch between your feeling of exertion and what you see on your watch with your heart rate, that mismatch is a really good red flag to be like, I might need to take a look at things a bit.
Mm. I love that. Can I just ask you a couple of questions just
100%.
about
Yeah, let's do
food?
it. Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
a couple. So, what's your approach? Like, for example, I've experimented with a number of different diets in the past, and I'm currently on a low carb vibe. Even carnivore, I've been kind of dabbling in that. And so what I find really interesting is what are your views as a coach who coaches Olympic athletes, and what do you think is optimal nutrition for exercise? Does it involve carbs? Does it not involve carbs? Do you have any special tricks? Like, what is your view?
Yeah.
How do you approach it?
I fuel for the training I'm going to do that day.
Okay.
So if I've got my zone four, zone five, high intensity interval session that day, I will fuel my body with a little bit more carbohydrate, and I'll fuel my body with the substrate that I need so that when I get on the bike, my tank is full.
Okay.
On days where I am not going to be doing my zone two work, or I'm going to be focused more on strength training, or maybe that zone three work, which is more sort of the heavier loads, or maybe it's a day where I know I'm not going to exercise as much. Those will be the day that I will really restrict my carbohydrate intake and focus more on vegetables and protein sources as my main, fat as my main nutrients. So
Awesome.
I really believe I think one of the challenges of the world that we live in where, diets have become I don't want to say it's fad diet sounds a little too cliche, but you know what I mean. It's like, a new diet will come on and it sort of consumes your thinking on every single day of the week needs to be a certain way.
Yeah, I agree with that.
Kind
Yeah.
of almost going back to where we started this conversation about exercise. It's like, well, I mean, I do Pilates and I do light strength training, and that's what I do.
Mm.
And you look and how long have you been doing that for? Well, 4 or 5 years. How are you feeling? How are you progressing? Well, I'm not.
Oh, that's so true. I
And then
didn't
we
think of it that
say,
way.
and then we
Yeah.
say, and then we say, well, hey, why don't we go into a phase where we do zone 3 and we go for 5 and push to 7 and you kind of change things up and you all of a sudden you're like, oh, wow, my body's all of a sudden like improving again. It's because
Yes.
you've given it a different signal, right? So
Mm.
if you just go back to that as our model and now we transfer to the world of nutrition, I would really advise your listeners to think about how they fuel to optimize their performance for the day.
Right.
On a day where I'm going to be not exercising and I'm going to need to have high mental acuity and be sharp, and on a day where I'm going to be, sitting around in the office a little more or at a conference, it's going to be a higher protein, higher fat, vegetable based day. And I'll have a very, very limited amount of normal sort of carbohydrate in my diet because those days, that's what helps me stay sharp and it helps me keep that blood sugar where I want it to be. And
Yeah.
it really allows me to be at an optimal performance. But if I eat like that on a day where I want to do my hard zone 4, zone 5 training, and I do that consistently over 6 to 12 weeks, I'm going to be looking down at my watch being like, man, that felt hard, but I can't get my heart rate up today.
Mm.
Why is that? And it's going to be like, well, I'm not fueling my body to perform. And so my body's dipping into its reserves
Mm.
and my body's speaking to me right now. And it's telling me, you know what? You're dipping into the reserves right now and you're pushing me too hard for what I have available. And I'm going to start to notice maybe my sleep's a little impaired. I'm feeling a little off. Um, that's a really good sign from a nutrition standpoint that, if I'm trying to eat like I do to prepare myself on a day with no physical activity for that sort of lower carb, higher protein, and I try to apply that in the context of, getting my good high intensity interval training on that day, it's a bad mix. It's a bad match. So, if you think about like 3 levers and, carbohydrate, fat, and protein on a daily basis, you can be like, where are my goals today? My goal today is that high intensity interval training. I need to just up a little bit of carbohydrate. I'm going to decrease a bit of fat and I'm going to keep the protein about the same. Now I'm on a day where I'm just doing strength work, or maybe I'm not going to be, I'm going to be at that conference. All right, I'm going to bring that carb up, bring the fat up, bring the protein up. And that's just a way that I think on a day by day basis, my approach to nutrition is always to be tailoring my nutrition on a daily basis to what my demands are going to be. And with an athlete population where training is everything they do, obviously it's very physically focused, but for the rest of us, as we start to become career focused, that becomes how do I have good, sharp mental acuity performing in our careers. It also might be sort of optimizing for our health and our longevity. And I think it's a good way to think about it. So now you have a bit more agency than saying, well, I've got to pick the carnivore diet,
Mm.
but darn, it's really affecting my interval based sessions and I feel like garbage. And then you're like, well, I talked to a nutritionist. I'm going to bump up my carbohydrates and, do something different. So that's now optimizing me for my hit day. But geez, the rest of the time when I'm not exercising, I feel brutal. It just gives you a little flexibility on a day by day basis to sort of optimize. And I guess you could say that, if step one for me is to optimize Tamara on a day by day basis based on what I need to do to perform that day, whatever that might be. The next layer down is from optimizing for the day. I might optimize a little bit more inside the day to be like, okay, so if my training set, if I'm going to try to get that workout in over lunch, I need to maybe adjust in the morning what I eat and adjust a little bit after my workout in terms of what I eat. So it's just like you can think about managing from the day based on how you want to perform to also just in and around that workout. so you perform the best. But create the conditions for your body to express its abilities at its highest levels. That's why nutrition and exercise are so intertwined.
Mm.
Is we're trying to create the perfect symbiotic relationship between, how we fuel and how we get our heads ready for our day and our workouts and all the things we want to do, and we align it with that output, which I think is, we could even get into the idea of how we achieve that more holistically, even with like meditation, spirituality, or just sort of getting in the zone. But all of these things connect, I think, to optimal health, which is prep your body for performance on that day for what that looks like for you. And nutrition is one of the best levers there to optimize for that.
Oh, the way you said it, it's really hit a different note that I've never heard before. So that it's almost like with nutrition, it's like an exercise program. You want your exercise program to change. You don't want to be doing the same thing all the time. And it's totally the same with nutrition. And I've never thought of it that way.
Yeah,
So when I'm on the carnivore diet, let's say, there is that feeling that, oh, I better stick to it because I kind of, want to get the benefits that they say you get when you're on the carnivore diet. But it is nice to change things up because your body needs to adjust and it needs to grow and it needs to
totally.
adapt. And yeah, I really like seeing it that way. And that's completely changed the way I see like nutrition, which is great.
Yeah.
Just last question. Do you fast? And do you fast on workout days? Do you do fasted workouts? What's your take on that?
I will do again, going back to a very, let's just call it, uh, fluid's the wrong word, but my nutrition reflects my energy expenditure.
Mm.
Full stop. When I'm expending a lot of energy of certain types, I adjust how I eat. So on days where I have maybe I think about sometimes for my weekends, there might be a day on a Saturday where I know that I'm going to be training a little differently. I might have had a big meal on the Friday night. Maybe you've indulged a little bit. These will be the places where I'll tend to fast the next day, and I'll insert fasting as a very purposeful counterbalance to how my weeks looked. I I am not a big fan of going into long-term periods of fasting. That's I know that's there's mixed evidence on where that lands, especially from the longevity standpoint. It seems like across the lifespan that maybe there's some real benefits to fasting, and so I would just say as a scientist, I'm not counting that out. In fact, it does really intrigue me, and it's something
Mm.
that
Mm.
I would invite your listeners to stay open-minded to. But for my own personal approach, fasting is something that probably happens 2 to 3 days per week at the most. More often, more like one day a week. And it might really be strategically placed around days where I'm not asking my body to go perform in an interval session or perform on a, it might be on a day where I'm asking my body to do very little. I'm going to do mobility work. I'm going to have a sauna later that night. I'm going to be more recovery focused, and that might be the day that I wake up and I fast until 1 or 2 o'clock, and I have my first meal, and then I restrict calorie on that day, and I'm very purposeful about it. So
Mm.
for me, purposeful fasting and sort of a sensible approach to that is how I've always looked at it. And again, it's just one more lever that I think, if you're looking at your week and there's a day a week or 2 days a week where you purposely fast till two, with a counterbalance of how you're training and what you're asking your body to do, I think it's quite reasonable. Um, yeah,
Oh, Matt, that conversation was so great, and I see the time, and I'm just so grateful to have taken that much time in your day. This is amazing. Like I'm gonna train today, and I know what I'm
love it.
doing. And the great thing about this conversation is you've actually confirmed a lot of the stuff that I was already doing, which really helps. But you've explained
It's great.
for the ladies listening, you've really explained how to break down their program. And I'm so grateful for that. And yeah, I just wanted to thank you so much for that. Where do you like people to follow
Yeah.
you?
Well, so I'm gonna say my personal website and my Instagram is Jordan Strength, Jordan Strength. So my website is jordanstrength.com and my Instagram Jordan Strength, and as your listeners can easily follow me there. But I'm going to throw out a new venture I'm working on. It's called Cascade Health.
Mhm.
Cascade is spelled CASCAID,
Oh, ID. Yep.
like yeah, AID. So Cascade.
Yeah.
So this will be coming out really soon. But Cascade is a really cool group of interdisciplinary scientists and practitioners, nutritionists, health coaches, who are all working together to kind of help you integrate all your questions about how am I going to make better informed decisions about my programs and my training and my nutrition while also integrating all your own personal health data. You know, it's one of the big limitations right now is everyone's got their like watch and their bed and everything's
Right.
instrumented,
It's
but
all
you're like,
different.
I don't know what to do. It's like it's all coming in. So what's really cool about Cascade is going to be a team that helps make sense of that for you, and their prime focus is women's health. So women's health and performance. So there's going to be a really cool outlet there, I think, for individuals who want to go learn more from other experts. So just imagine having, myself with a OBGYN who's knowledgeable around, hormone health for women and putting in a nutritionist and maybe a psychologist, and we're all able to sort of create a multidisciplinary view on how to pull all these things together.
Yeah.
That's where Cascade Health's is heading. So go check that out. I think the website should be out in another couple of weeks. So I'd love to see your listeners maybe follow us there.
Lovely. Oh God. Well, that's really exciting. I'm sure it'll go so, so great for you guys. But thank you so much. And we've got to do this again at some point soon.
Love it.